The entire town watched as her last shred of dignity hit the dirt. Naomi Hale stood frozen on that wooden platform while her so-called fiancé hurled her belongings into the mud, declaring her worthless to anyone who'd listen. The crowd laughed. Some pointed. Others whispered behind their hands. She had nowhere to go, no money left, and the last train was already whistling its departure. That's when a stranger stepped out from the shadows. A man the town feared more than they pitied her. This is their story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The heat was suffocating that afternoon in Red Hollow. Not the kind that made you sweat and complain, but the kind that pressed down on your chest and made breathing feel like work. Dust hung in the air thick enough to taste, and the sun beat mercilessly on the weathered buildings lining Main Street. It was the sort of day where sensible people stayed indoors. But Red Hollow wasn't known for sensible people. Elias Mercer wasn't in town by choice. He'd needed supplies, flour, salt, a few other things that kept a man alive when he lived 15 miles from the nearest neighbor. He'd timed his arrival for mid-afternoon specifically because most folks would be inside avoiding the heat. Fewer people meant fewer conversations, fewer stares, fewer reminders of who he used to be. He was loading sacks into his wagon when the train whistle cut through the oppressive quiet. The 3:47 from Cheyenne, right on schedule. Elias didn't look up. Trains came and went. People arrived with hope and left with disappointment. That was the way of frontier towns. They chewed people up and spit them out without ceremony. He'd seen it happen dozens of times in the 5 years since he'd settled outside Red Hollow, always keeping himself at arm's length from the town's drama. But then he heard the shouting. Thomas Garrett's voice carried across the platform, loud and sharp enough to make heads turn up and down the street. Elias knew that tone. It was the sound of a man who wanted an audience, who needed witnesses for whatever performance he was about to give. Elias should have climbed onto his wagon and left, should have clicked his tongue and gotten his horses moving before curiosity could take root. Instead, something made him pause with one boot on the running board, his hand still gripping the rough wood. "You lied to me," Garrett was bellowing. "You're a fraud and a con artist, and everyone here needs to know it." A woman's voice responded, quieter, harder to make out. Elias couldn't catch the words, but he heard the tremor in them. Fear and humiliation wrapped together. Against his better judgment, Elias turned around. The platform was crowded now. People had emerged from shops and offices, drawn by the commotion like flies to rotting meat. They formed a loose semicircle around Garrett and a young woman Elias had never seen before. She stood near a pile of luggage, 2 battered trunks and a carpet bag that had seen better days. Garrett was in his element, playing to the crowd with theatrical gestures. He was a merchant, moderately successful by Red Hollow standards, which meant he had enough money to feel important and enough insecurity to need constant validation. His shop sold dry goods and overpriced imports to people who couldn't afford to travel elsewhere. "I sent for a wife," Garrett announced, his voice dripping with injured dignity. "A respectable woman with means, as advertised in her letters. Instead, I get this," he gestured dismissively at the young woman, "this penniless liar who fabricated an entire inheritance that doesn't exist." The woman's face had gone white. She was younger than Elias had first thought, maybe 25 at most, with dark hair pinned up in a style that had probably looked neat when she boarded the train, but now hung loose around her face. Her dress was plain but well made, the work of someone who knew their way around a needle and thread. She clutched a small handbag against her chest like it was a shield. "I never claimed to be wealthy," she said, her voice shaking but audible now. "I told you I was a seamstress, that I could work." "You said you had resources," Garrett cut her off. "You said you could contribute financially to a household. Those were your exact words in your letters. Don't stand there and deny it now." "I said I could support myself through my trade," the woman insisted, spots of color rising in her cheeks. "I never promised money I didn't have. If you misunderstood—" "Misunderstood?" Garrett let out a harsh laugh. "You deliberately misled me. Wrote your letters all fancy-like to make yourself sound educated and refined. Probably copied phrases from books to seem smarter than you are." The crowd murmured. A few people nodded. Elias felt his jaw tighten. The woman, Naomi, he'd heard Garrett call her, looked around at the watching faces. She was searching for sympathy, for someone to speak up on her behalf. She found only curiosity and judgment, The cold assessment of people deciding whether she was worth their pity or their scorn. I was honest about who I am, Naomi said, her voice stronger now despite the tears threatening to spill. If you read my letters and imagine something else, that's not my fault. Not your fault? Garrett's face was reddening. He bent down and grabbed one of her trunks, heaving it open with enough force that the hinges screamed. Clothes tumbled out, simple dresses, undergarments, a few personal items that had no business being displayed in public. He snatched up a worn shawl and held it up like evidence in a trial. Look at this. Look at these rags. You think I'd have paid for your train ticket if I'd known you were bringing garbage? You think I'm running a charity for failed seamstresses who can't afford decent clothes? Naomi lunged forward, trying to gather her belongings back into the trunk, but Garrett kicked it further away. More items spilled across the platform. The crowd pressed closer, necks craning to see. Elias felt something dark and familiar stir in his chest. He'd witnessed this kind of cruelty before. People turning on someone vulnerable because it made them feel powerful, because they could. He'd participated in it himself once upon a time, in ways that still kept him awake at night. Please, Naomi was saying, down on her knees now, trying to rescue her possessions from the dirt. Please, just let me collect my things. I'll leave. I'll get back on the train. Train's leaving in 5 minutes, Garrett said with satisfaction. And you still owe me $20 for your ticket from Cheyenne. I expect payment before you board. Naomi's hand stilled. She looked up at him with dawning horror. I don't have $20. You know I don't. That's why I came here, why I answered your advertisement. Then I guess you're not going anywhere, are you? The crowd's energy shifted. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a woman stranded with no money, no prospects, and a town full of strangers who'd just watched her humiliation. A few people looked uncomfortable now, shuffling their feet. But no one spoke up. No one offered help. Sarah Brennan, the grocer's wife, whispered something to her husband. He shook his head firmly. Martha Chen, who ran the boarding house, crossed her arms and pressed her lips into a thin line. The message was clear. This woman had been publicly labeled a liar and a fraud. Helping her would mean associating with her, and no one in Red Hollow was willing to take that risk. Naomi remained on her knees, surrounded by her scattered belongings, as the reality of her situation sank in. The train whistle blew again, a warning, 2 minutes to departure. Nothing to say now? Garrett taunted. No more fancy words from your copied letters? Something in Elias snapped. He didn't make the decision consciously. One moment he was standing by his wagon, watching from a distance, and the next his boots were carrying him across the street toward the platform. People parted for him instinctively. They always did. Elias Mercer didn't come to town often, but when he did, people noticed. It wasn't just his height, though at 6'3" he stood taller than most men, or his build, which was lean but solid in a way that suggested hard physical labor. It was something else, something in his eyes that made people nervous, a stillness that felt dangerous, a silence that asked no questions because it expected no answers. He'd earned that reputation years ago, in places he tried not to think about anymore. He'd killed men, not out of passion or in anger, but coldly, efficiently, because someone had paid him to do it. He'd been good at it too, good enough that his name had carried weight in certain circles. Good enough that when he finally walked away and bought a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere, people still whispered about who he'd been. Red Hollow knew pieces of his history, enough to fear him, enough to leave him alone. He stopped at the edge of the platform. The crowd had gone quiet. Garrett noticed him and straightened up, trying to maintain his authority despite the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This doesn't concern you, Mercer. Elias ignored him. He looked at Naomi instead. She was still on her knees, one hand pressed flat against the platform, the other clutching that handbag. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, her carefully pinned hair falling in dark strands around her shoulders. But what caught Elias's attention was her expression. She wasn't looking at Garrett anymore. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was staring at the ground with the hollow-eyed resignation of someone who just realized they were completely alone. He'd seen that look before, in mirrors mostly, during the years when he'd been trying to outrun himself. Get up, Elias said quietly. Naomi's head jerked up. She blinked at him, confused, not sure if he was talking to her. Get up, he repeated. Collect your things. Now wait just a minute, Garrett started, but Elias cut him off with a glance. The merchant's mouth clicked shut. Naomi hesitated, then slowly pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were shaking. She bent to gather her clothes, shoving them haphazardly back into the trunk. Her hands were trembling so badly she kept dropping things. Elias stepped onto the platform and picked up the second trunk. It wasn't heavy. He carried it down to his wagon and set it in the bed with his supplies. When he turned back, Naomi was struggling with the larger trunk, trying to drag it across the platform. "Leave it," Elias said. "I'll get it." "I can manage," she said through gritted teeth. "I know you can. I'll get it anyway." He lifted the trunk easily and carried it to the wagon. The carpet bag followed. When he looked back, Naomi was standing at the edge of the platform, still clutching her handbag, looking lost. "You coming or not?" Elias asked. Her eyes widened. "Coming where?" "My ranch, 15 miles northwest. You can stay there until you figure out what's next." The crowd erupted in whispers. Garrett found his voice again. "You can't be serious, Mercer. You don't know this woman. She's a liar and a con artist." "She's a person in trouble," Elias said flatly. "And you're a man throwing someone else's belongings in the dirt because it makes you feel big. I know which one I'd rather help." Garrett's face went scarlet. "This is outrageous. Completely improper. You can't just... I can do whatever I want on my own property." Elias turned back to Naomi. "Last chance. Train's leaving. If you stay here, you're on your own with him and everyone else who just stood by and watched." Naomi looked at the wagon, then at Garrett, then at the watching crowd. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. She was clearly terrified of Elias, of her options, of the choice she was about to make. But she was more terrified of staying. "Thank you," she whispered, and climbed onto the wagon seat. Elias swung up beside her and took the reins. The crowd was buzzing now, shock and scandal written across every face. He could hear fragments of whispered conversations, speculation about what he intended to do with her, whether this was charity or something darker. Let them talk. He'd stopped caring about Red Hollow's opinion years ago. As the wagon rolled down Main Street, Elias caught sight of Garrett standing on the platform, fists clenched, watching them leave. The merchant's expression promised trouble. Elias filed that information away for later and kept the horses moving. They were half a mile out of town before Naomi spoke. "Why did you do that?" Elias kept his eyes on the road. "Seemed like the right thing." "You don't know me. Don't need to. People are going to talk. They'll say..." She paused, searching for words. "They'll say terrible things about both of us." "They already say terrible things about me. A few more won't make much difference." The wagon rattled over a rough patch of ground. Naomi gripped the edge of her seat to keep from bouncing off. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was small and tired. "I wasn't lying. Not really. I told him I was a seamstress. I told him I could work, that I had skills. But he only heard what he wanted to hear. He saw educated and refined in my letters and invented a woman with money and connections. When I showed up as myself, just me, he felt cheated. You don't owe me explanations. I know, but I want you to understand. I'm not a con artist. I'm just desperate." Elias glanced at her. Her profile was sharp against the afternoon sun, chin lifted despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. There was pride there, battered but not broken. He recognized it because he'd felt the same way once, in the months after he'd walked away from his old life, humiliated by what he'd been, defiant about what he refused to become. "Desperate isn't a crime," he said. "Apparently it is in Red Hollow. Red Hollow isn't known for charity. What about you?" She turned to face him fully now. "Are you known for charity?" "No." "Then why help me?" Elias didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure he had an answer that would make sense to her. How could he explain that watching her on that platform had felt like watching his own past play out? The isolation, the shame, the certainty that no one would step in because no one cared enough to bother. How could he tell her that helping her was as much about himself as it was about her? "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said finally. "Bad things. The kind that stick with you. Maybe this evens the scales a little. So I'm penance? You're a person who needed help. I was in a position to give it, that's all." She studied him with unsettling directness. He kept his eyes on the road, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone dangerous, probably. That's what the crowd seemed to think. The way people moved out of your way, they were afraid of you. They should be. The words came out harder than he'd intended. He softened his tone. I've given them reason to be afraid. You probably should be too. Are you planning to hurt me? No. Then I'll decide for myself whether to be afraid. They lapsed into silence again. The road stretched ahead, a dusty ribbon cutting through endless prairie grass that rippled in waves under the hot wind. The land out here was harsh and unforgiving, beautiful in its emptiness, but brutal to anyone who didn't respect it. Elias had learned to love its isolation. After years of crowded cities and blood-soaked rooms, the silence felt like absolution. His ranch appeared on the horizon about an hour later, a small cluster of buildings huddled against the vastness. The main house was modest, single-story, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. A barn stood nearby, its red paint faded to rust. There was a chicken coop, a small corral, and a vegetable garden that had seen better days. Everything looked weathered and worn, functional but neglected. Naomi took it in without comment. Elias wondered what she was thinking, whether she was regretting her choice, whether the isolation was already pressing down on her the way it had on others who'd visited over the years. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Wait here. He went inside first, scanning the main room with the stranger's eyes. It was clean enough. He wasn't a slob, but sparse. A table with 2 chairs, a stove, shelves with basic supplies. Everything necessary and nothing extra. The bedroom was off to the left, barely big enough for the narrow bed and chest of drawers it contained. This was going to be a problem. He went back outside. Naomi had climbed down from the wagon and was standing in the yard, looking around with an expression he couldn't quite read. There's only one bedroom, Elias said bluntly. You'll take it. I'll sleep out here. He gestured to the main room. I can't take your bed. You can, and you will. This isn't up for discussion. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. All right, thank you. I'll get your things. He carried her trunks inside and set them at the foot of the bed. The room felt different with her belongings in it, smaller somehow, more crowded. He backed out quickly. Naomi had followed him in and was standing in the doorway, taking in the space. Her expression had gone carefully blank, the way people's faces did when they were trying not to show disappointment. It's not much, Elias said. It's more than I had an hour ago. There's a pump out back for water. Outhouse is behind the barn. I've got chickens. You can collect eggs in the morning. I usually make breakfast around dawn, but you don't have to keep my schedule. I want to help with cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. I'm not here to be a burden. You're not a burden. Then what am I? It was a fair question. Elias wished he had a good answer. Guest didn't feel right. Neither did employee or tenant. She was something undefined, someone who existed in his space without a clear role or purpose, and that ambiguity made him uncomfortable. You're someone who needed shelter, he said finally, and I had shelter to give. We don't need to complicate it more than that. She nodded slowly, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was trying to figure him out, trying to understand what he wanted from her. He couldn't blame her for being suspicious. Men didn't usually help women without expecting something in return, especially not men with his reputation. I'll leave you to get settled, Elias said, already moving toward the door. Supper's around sunset, nothing fancy. Mr. Mercer? She stopped him with his name. Elias. Elias, thank you for what you did in town. You didn't have to do that. Already told you, don't thank me. I know, I'm doing it anyway. He left before she could say anything else, pulling the door shut behind him with more force than necessary. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Elias stood on the porch and stared out at the land he'd claimed as his own 5 years ago, the land that was supposed to be his escape from everything he'd been. What the hell had he just done? He'd brought a strange woman to his isolated ranch based on nothing but an impulse he didn't fully understand. She'd be dependent on him for food, for safety, for everything, and he'd be responsible for her welfare whether he wanted to be or not. The town would be talking already, spinning stories about his intentions. Garrett would nurse his wounded pride and look for ways to cause trouble. And yet, standing there in the fading light, Elias couldn't bring himself to regret it. Inside the house, he heard the soft sounds of Naomi moving around, unpacking probably, trying to make herself at home in a stranger's bedroom. He thought about the look on her face when Garrett had dumped her belongings in the dirt, the resignation in her eyes, the way no one had stepped forward to help. Someone had to. It was as simple and complicated as that. Elias walked to the barn to check on his horses, deliberately giving Naomi space and time to adjust. The animals nickered softly as he approached, familiar and comforting in their simple needs. He spent longer than necessary brushing them down, checking their hooves, measuring out their feed. When he finally ran out of tasks, he stood in the barn doorway watching darkness creep across the prairie. The light in the house's window glowed warm and golden. It had been a long time since that light meant anything other than his own solitary presence. Having someone else there felt strange, almost intrusive, like walking into a room and finding the furniture rearranged. He'd gotten used to silence, to isolation, to the safety of keeping everyone at arm's length. Now that safety was compromised, and he wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified. When full dark had fallen, Elias made his way back to the house. He found Naomi in the kitchen, examining his meager supplies with the focused attention of someone conducting an inventory. She'd changed out of her traveling dress into something simpler, and her hair was pinned up more securely now. She looked more settled, more solid, less like she might disappear if he blinked. "You don't have much," she observed. "I don't need much. When's the last time you ate a vegetable that wasn't from a can?" "Don't remember." She shook her head, not quite smiling, but close. "That explains the garden out front. It's dying of neglect." "I'm not much of a gardener." "Lucky for you, I am. Or at least I used to be, before—" She stopped herself. "I can fix it, if you want. Get it producing again." "You don't have to do that." "I want to. I need to do something useful." Elias understood that. The need to be useful, to earn your keep, to prove you weren't just taking up space. He'd felt the same way when he'd first come here, working himself to exhaustion every day because physical labor was easier than sitting still with his thoughts. "All right," he said. "Garden's yours if you want it." "Thank you." She turned back to the shelves, pulling down ingredients. "I'm going to make dinner. Do you have any dietary restrictions I should know about?" "I eat whatever's in front of me." "Helpful." This time she did smile, just a little, and Elias felt something strange in his chest. Not quite warmth, he'd forgotten what that felt like, but an absence of cold, maybe. A thawing. He stepped back toward the door. "I'll be outside if you need anything." "You can stay, unless you don't want to." "I should check the perimeter, make sure everything's secured for the night." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. The truth was, he didn't know how to be in a room with another person anymore, didn't remember the rhythms of casual companionship. His instinct was to retreat, to put space between himself and anyone who might get too close. But Naomi just nodded, accepting the excuse without challenge. "I'll call you when it's ready." He escaped to the porch and sat on the steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the darkness. The prairie at night was full of sounds, insects, distant animals, wind moving through the grass. He'd learned to read those sounds, to distinguish between normal nighttime activity and potential threats. Tonight, everything seemed calm, but he stayed alert anyway. Old habits. 20 minutes later, Naomi's voice came from the doorway. "It's ready, such as it is." The table was set with 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 cups of water. She'd managed to make something edible out of his limited supplies. Some kind of bean dish with bits of salt pork and canned tomatoes. It smelled better than anything Elias had cooked for himself in months. They sat across from each other, and for a few minutes there was only the sound of eating. Elias was hungrier than he'd realized. Naomi picked at her food more tentatively, taking small bites, her eyes downcast. "It's good," Elias said, because it seemed like something he should say. "It's adequate. I can do better with actual ingredients. I'll get supplies next time I'm in town." "Will that be soon?" "Week or 2, probably." She nodded, still not looking at him. The silence stretched out, increasingly awkward. Elias cast around for something to say and came up empty. He'd lost the knack for small talk years ago. Naomi saved him by speaking first. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on what it is." "The people in town. They're afraid of you. Why?" Elias set down his fork. He should have expected this question, should have prepared an answer that wasn't the full truth, but wasn't quite a lie either. "I used to do bad things for money," he said carefully. "Hurt people. Worse than hurt them. I was good at it. That kind of reputation doesn't disappear just because you move to the middle of nowhere and try to live quiet. How long ago? 5 years since I quit. Longer since it started. Do you regret it? Every day. The honesty surprised him. He hadn't meant to say that last part, hadn't meant to give her even that small glimpse into the mess inside his head. But it was out now, hanging in the air between them. Naomi finally looked up, meeting his eyes. Everyone who came to America is running from something. That's what my mother used to say. She said this country was built by people trying to start over, trying to be someone new. Maybe that applies to frontier towns too. Maybe. Red Hollow doesn't seem big on second chances, though. No, she agreed quietly. It doesn't. They finished eating in more comfortable silence after that. When the plates were clean, Naomi started to gather them up, but Elias stopped her. I'll clean up. You've done enough. It's just dishes, and you've had a hell of a day. Go rest. She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. All right, thank you. For dinner, for everything. Stop thanking me. Can't help it. Where I come from, gratitude matters. She disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door softly. Elias heard the creak of the bed as she sat down, then the rustle of fabric as she changed into nightclothes. He focused very hard on washing dishes and not thinking about the fact that there was a woman in his bedroom, separated from him by a single thin door. This was going to be complicated. When the dishes were clean and put away, Elias made himself a bedroll on the floor near the stove. It wasn't comfortable, but he'd slept in worse places. The hard floor was almost familiar, a reminder of years spent in cheap boarding houses and rougher accommodations. He lay there in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him, and wondered what the hell happened next. In the bedroom, Naomi Hale lay in a stranger's bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She kept replaying the day, the train pulling into Red Hollow, her hopeful nervousness as she'd stepped onto the platform, Garrett's face shifting from greeting to disgust when he'd realized she wasn't what he expected. The humiliation burned even now, hours later. She'd stood there in front of everyone and been declared worthless. Her possessions had been thrown in the dirt like trash, and no one, not one single person, had objected until Elias Mercer stepped forward. She still wasn't sure what to make of him. He was clearly dangerous, the way he moved, the way he held himself, the careful precision of his words. All of it spoke to someone who'd seen violence and dealt it in return. The town's fear wasn't baseless. Whatever he'd done before coming here, it had been bad enough to leave a permanent mark. And yet he'd helped her. Not because he knew her or owed her anything, but because it was the right thing to do. He'd brought her to his home, given her his bed, asked for nothing in return. That kind of decency from that kind of man didn't add up, and the contradiction made her nervous. What did he want? Men always wanted something. But when she thought back over the evening, his careful distance, his awkwardness, the way he'd practically fled to the porch to avoid sharing space with her, she couldn't identify any ulterior motive. He seemed almost as uncomfortable with the situation as she was. If he had predatory intentions, he was hiding them extremely well. Maybe, impossible as it seemed, he really was just helping her. The thought was more terrifying than reassuring. If he expected something, she could prepare for it, defend against it. But if this was genuine charity with no strings attached, then she owed him a debt she had no way to repay. She'd be dependent on his continued goodwill, trapped in gratitude with no clear path to independence. Naomi hated feeling helpless, hated it with a passion that burned in her chest and made her hands curl into fists beneath the blanket. She'd left Philadelphia to escape helplessness. Her mother had died 2 years ago, leaving Naomi alone with her father's debts and no way to pay them. She'd worked herself to exhaustion in a factory, then as a seamstress, scraping together barely enough to survive. When her landlord had made it clear that rent could be paid in ways other than cash, she'd known it was time to leave. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed like salvation, a chance to start over, to be valued for her skills instead of treated as disposable. She'd written honest letters about who she was, what she could offer, but she'd also tried to sound educated, refined, worthy of consideration. Maybe she'd tried too hard. Maybe Garrett had read between the lines and invented a fantasy that she could never fulfill. Either way, she'd failed again. Ended up in worse circumstances than before, stranded in a frontier town with no money and no prospects, dependent on a dangerous stranger's charity. Some fresh start. Naomi rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Through the thin wall, she could hear Elias moving around, settling down for the night. The floorboards creaked under his weight. Then silence. Tomorrow she'd start figuring out what came next. She'd prove herself useful, earn her keep, and find a way to regain some independence. She wouldn't be a burden. She wouldn't be pitied. She'd survive this the way she'd survived everything else, with stubborn determination and refusal to give up. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and moaning around the corners of the house. The prairie night pressed close, vast and indifferent to the two wounded people sheltering under this modest roof. Neither of them slept well that first night, both acutely aware of the other's presence, both wondering what they'd gotten themselves into. In town, Thomas Garrett stood in his shop long after closing, staring at the empty street through his window. His humiliation burned hot and acidic in his throat. He'd been made to look foolish, first by that lying woman, then by Mercer's interference. People would be laughing about it for weeks. He couldn't let this stand. Garrett had worked hard to build his reputation in Red Hollow, to be seen as respectable and successful. He'd followed every social convention, maintained every proper appearance. And now Mercer, a known killer, a man with blood on his hands, had made him look weak in front of the entire town. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. Someone needed to understand that there were consequences for that kind of interference. Someone needed to learn that Thomas Garrett wasn't a man to be embarrassed and ignored. He turned away from the window and began planning his next move. He had friends on the town council. He had influence. He had the weight of respectability on his side. Mercer had made an enemy today. He just didn't know it yet. Dawn came too early and too bright. Elias woke with his back screaming from the hard floor. His neck kinked at an angle that promised a headache later. He lay there for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar sound of someone else breathing in his house, before memory caught up with him. Right. Naomi. He pushed himself up slowly, joints popping, and moved as quietly as he could toward the door. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting everything in shades of pale gold. He stepped outside into the cool morning air and took a long breath, trying to shake off the strangeness of the night. The chickens were already making noise, demanding attention. Elias headed to the coop and scattered feed, collected eggs, checked the water. Normal tasks. Familiar routines. He clung to them like lifelines. When he came back inside 20 minutes later, Naomi was up. She'd emerged from the bedroom fully dressed, her hair pinned up neatly, looking more put together than anyone had a right to at this hour. She was examining his stove with the critical eye of someone who knew their way around a kitchen. "Morning," Elias said, setting the egg basket on the counter. "Good morning. How do you normally take your coffee?" "Black, strong as possible. That I can manage." She was already moving around the kitchen with surprising confidence, given that she'd only been here one night. "I found cornmeal. I can make Johnny cakes if you want." "You don't have to cook every meal." "I know, but I'm awake and hungry. And cooking for two isn't much harder than cooking for one." She glanced at him. "Unless you'd rather I didn't. If this is your space and I'm intruding, no, it's fine. Cook if you want." She nodded and turned back to the stove. Elias retreated to the porch, giving her room to work. He sat on the steps and watched the prairie wake up, trying not to think about how easily she'd slipped into his space, how natural it felt to come inside and find someone already making coffee. He should have been more bothered by it. Should have felt invaded or uncomfortable. Instead, he just felt tired and confused and oddly relieved that he didn't have to face the morning alone. 15 minutes later, Naomi called him in. She'd made a decent breakfast. Johnny cakes, fried eggs, coffee that could strip paint. They ate in silence again, but it was less awkward than the night before. Almost companionable. "I'm going to work on the garden today," Naomi said eventually. "If that's still all right?" "Go ahead. Tools are in the barn. Anything you need that I don't have, make a list." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "What will you be doing?" "Fence repair on the north pasture. I've been putting it off too long." "Will you be gone all day?" There was something in her voice. Not quite fear, but wariness. Elias understood. She was alone out here with a man she didn't know, no neighbors for miles, no way to get help if she needed it. Of course she'd want to know where he'd be. "I'll be within shouting distance," he said. "And I'll be back for lunch. You won't be completely alone." Relief flickered across her face. I wasn't worried. I just wanted to know in case something happens. I get it. It's smart to ask. They cleaned up together this time, an awkward dance of reaching around each other in the small kitchen. Naomi washed while Elias dried, and neither of them commented on the strange domesticity of it. When the dishes were done, Elias grabbed his tools and headed out. He looked back once from the pasture gate and saw Naomi kneeling in the garden, pulling weeds with focused intensity. She'd tied a scarf over her hair and rolled up her sleeves, and something about the sight made his chest tighten in a way he didn't want to examine. He turned away and got to work. The fence repair took longer than expected. Several posts had rotted through and needed replacing, which meant digging new holes in ground that was more rock than soil. By mid-morning, Elias was sweating through his shirt despite the relatively cool temperature. His hands were blistered and his shoulders ached, but the physical labor felt good. It gave him something to focus on besides the woman currently living in his house. He tried not to think about what people in town were saying right now. Tried not to imagine the conversations happening in the general store, the post office, the saloon. Thomas Garrett would be spinning the story his way, painting Elias as a predator who'd taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. Others would speculate about what was really happening out here, what Elias's true intentions were. The hell of it was, he didn't have any intentions. He'd acted on impulse yesterday, driven by something he still didn't fully understand, and now he was stuck with the consequences. A woman was depending on him. The town was probably planning some kind of intervention, and he had no idea what happened next. He was tamping down the third fence post when he heard someone approaching. His hand went automatically to the knife on his belt before he recognized the horse and rider. Doc Morrison raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Easy there, Mercer. Just making a house call. Elias relaxed slightly, but didn't move away from the fence. Nobody's sick. Didn't say they were. Morrison was a thin man in his 50s, one of the few people in Red Hollow who treated Elias like a human being instead of a loaded gun. He'd been a field surgeon during the war and had seen enough violence that Elias's reputation didn't particularly impress him. I heard you had a guest. Thought I'd ride out and make sure everything was all right. Everything's fine. You sure about that? Young woman shows up expecting marriage, gets publicly humiliated, ends up at a bachelor's ranch 15 miles from town. Folks are worried. Folks should mind their own business. Morrison dismounted and leaned against the fence. You know that's not how this works. Woman like that needs protection, proper chaperonage. You taking her in like this? It looks bad, Mercer. Looks bad to who? The same people who stood around and watched Garrett treat her like garbage? They don't get to judge how bad things look. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying there's talk. And that talk is going to cause problems for both of you if you're not careful. Elias slammed the post driver harder than necessary. What do you want me to do? Throw her out? Send her back to town where nobody wants her? No. But maybe consider that there are ways to make this situation more acceptable. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, marriage would solve a lot of problems, make things proper, give her protection and respectability, give you, I'm not marrying some woman I met yesterday just to satisfy Red Hollow's sense of propriety. Morrison held up his hands again. All right, fair enough, but then you need to understand what you're up against. Garrett's stirring up trouble. He's talking to the town council, claiming you interfered with a legal contract, that the woman still owes him money for her train ticket. She doesn't have any money. He knows that. Doesn't matter. He's making noise about debt collection, about inappropriate situations, about how a man with your history shouldn't be trusted with a vulnerable woman. He's building a case, Mercer. A case for what? For intervention, either legal or otherwise. I'd bet money the council's going to send someone out here within the week, wanting to check on her welfare, make sure you're not taking advantage. Elias felt anger rise hot in his throat. I'm not taking advantage of anyone. She needed help. I gave it. End of story. I believe you, but you need to think about how this looks from the outside. You're a known killer living alone with a young woman who has nowhere else to go. People are going to assume the worst. People always assume the worst about me. And maybe that's why you should be extra careful this time, because it's not just your reputation at stake anymore. Morrison let that sink in, then climbed back on his horse. I'm not here to tell you what to do, Mercer. Just wanted you to know what's coming. If you need anything, medical supplies, someone to vouch for your character, whatever, you let me know. Why are you helping me? Because I've seen enough of humanity's worst to recognize when someone's trying to be decent. And because that girl deserves better than what Garrett did to her yesterday. He tipped his hat. You take care now. He rode off, leaving Elias alone with the fence posts and his simmering frustration. The day suddenly felt heavier, more complicated. He'd known there would be talk, but he hadn't anticipated organized opposition. Garrett wasn't just nursing wounded pride. He was actively working against them. Elias finished the fence repair in grim silence and headed back to the house for lunch. He found Naomi still in the garden, dirt under her nails, and satisfaction on her face. She'd cleared half the weeds and turned over a good portion of soil. I found strawberry plants, she said, brushing hair off her forehead with the back of her hand. They're half dead, but I think I can save them. And there's asparagus trying to come up over there. Whoever started this garden knew what they were doing. That was the previous owner's wife. She died about 6 months before I bought the place. I'm sorry. I never met her. But she left behind good bones. The garden, some of the interior work in the house. You can see where someone cared about making this place a home. Naomi looked around the property with new appreciation. What happened to the husband? Couldn't bear to stay after she passed. Sold everything and moved back east. Some people can't handle the loneliness out here. And you can? I prefer it to the alternative. They went inside and Naomi made sandwiches from supplies that were rapidly depleting. As they ate, Elias debated whether to tell her about Morrison's visit. She had a right to know what was being said, what might be coming, but he didn't want to scare her or make her feel like she'd caused problems just by existing. Someone came by while I was working, he said finally. Doc Morrison, he wanted to check on you. Naomi's hand stilled. Check on me how? Make sure you were all right, that I wasn't, he struggled for the right words, that the situation was acceptable. Acceptable? She set down her sandwich. What did you tell him? That everything was fine, that you're here by choice and free to leave whenever you want. And did he believe you? I think so. But he warned me that others might not. There's talk in town. Garrett's making trouble trying to stir up the council against us. Against us. Naomi repeated it quietly, like she was testing how the words felt. I've been here one day, and I've already made you a target. You didn't make me anything. I chose to help you. That was my decision. A decision that's causing you problems. I've dealt with worse problems. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You could still change your mind. Take me back to town. Let them figure out what to do with me. It would be easier for you. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't seem to matter much. It matters to me. The words came out more intense than he'd intended. Naomi blinked, clearly surprised by the vehemence in his tone. Why? She asked softly. Why does it matter to you? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Elias struggled to articulate something he barely understood himself. I've spent 5 years trying to be someone different than I was, trying to prove that I'm more than the things I did. And every day this town reminds me that I'm not, that I'll always be the killer they're afraid of, that I'll never be anything else. When I saw you on that platform yesterday, when I saw everyone judging you, deciding you weren't worth helping, I recognized it. The isolation, the certainty that you're alone and nobody cares. I couldn't walk away from that. So I'm a mirror. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of being the kind of person who walks away. Naomi absorbed this in silence. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I don't want to be someone's redemption project. You're not. You're just a person who needed help. And what happens when I don't need help anymore? When I figure out what comes next? Then you leave. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, Elias agreed. It's not. They finished lunch in thoughtful quiet. Afterward, Naomi went back to the garden and Elias returned to his fence work. But something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement of the strange situation they were in. An understanding that neither of them had intended this, but both of them were stuck with it now. The afternoon passed slowly. Elias finished the fence and moved on to other tasks, checking the barn roof, repairing a broken hinge on the chicken coop door, splitting wood for the stove. He kept himself busy and tried not to watch Naomi working in the garden, tried not to notice how she hummed softly while she worked, or how the afternoon sun caught in her dark hair. He was failing spectacularly at both. As evening approached, Elias went inside to find Naomi already starting dinner. She'd raided his supplies again and was doing something with canned vegetables and dried beans that smelled surprisingly good. I need to go to town soon, he said, watching her work. We're running low on too many things. I can make a list. Make 2 lists. One for essentials, one for things that would be nice to have. I can't promise the second list, but I'll do what I can. You don't have to spend your money on me. Consider it payment for the cooking. I haven't eaten this well in years. She smiled slightly at that, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. When will you go? Day after tomorrow, probably. I'll leave early, be back by evening. And I'll be here alone all day. Is that a problem? No, I'm just stating a fact. She stirred the pot on the stove. I'm not afraid to be alone. I'm afraid of what happens when you come back and tell me the town won't let this continue, that I need to leave. That's not going to happen. You can't promise that. I can promise that nobody's going to force you to do anything. Whatever happens, it'll be your choice. She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was trying to see past the surface to whatever lay beneath. Why are you so sure you can protect me? You're one man against an entire town. I've beaten worse odds. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. They ate dinner in this growing darkness, the silence between them less uncomfortable now, more like 2 people learning to exist in the same space. Afterward, Naomi insisted on cleaning up while Elias checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. When he came back inside, she was sitting at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil, writing out lists. Her handwriting was neat and precise, the letters carefully formed. Did you go to school? Elias asked, surprising himself with the question. Through 8th grade. My mother taught me at home after that. She believed education was important, especially for women who might need to support themselves. Naomi's hand paused over the paper. She was right. After my father died and left nothing but debts, my ability to read and write and calculate numbers is what kept me from starving. What did your father do? Drank mostly. Worked as a clerk when he could stay sober long enough. He wasn't a bad man exactly, just weak. He couldn't handle my mother's death. The drinking got worse after she passed, and then one morning he just didn't wake up. The doctor said it was his heart, but I think it was just that he'd given up. I'm sorry. Don't be. I mourned them both a long time ago. She went back to writing. What about your family? Dead, parents, and a sister. Cholera epidemic when I was 15. Is that when you started doing the work you did? Elias should have deflected, should have changed the subject. Instead, he found himself answering honestly. Not right away. I tried legitimate work first, factory jobs, dock work, whatever I could find, but I was angry and I didn't know what to do with it. Got into fights, made enemies. Eventually, someone noticed I was good at hurting people and offered to pay me for it. Seemed easier than breaking my back for pennies. So I said yes. Do you wish you'd said no? Every single day. Naomi nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. We're quite a pair, aren't we? 2 people running from bad choices and worse luck. Maybe that's why this works. We understand each other. Do we? She looked up at him. I'm not sure I understand anything about you. You're a killer who gives his bed to strangers, a violent man who handles everything gently. You don't make sense, Elias Mercer. I could say the same about you. You're a woman who just got publicly humiliated, and instead of falling apart, you're out there bringing a dead garden back to life. You're scared, but you won't show it. You're grateful, but you resent needing to be grateful. You're as much a contradiction as I am. Fair enough. She returned to her lists. Maybe neither of us makes sense. Maybe that's all right. Elias felt something loosen in his chest at those words. Maybe it was all right. Maybe they could just be 2 confusing people trying to figure things out without needing to have all the answers. He left her to her list-making and went to prepare his bedroll. The floor wasn't getting any softer, but he was adjusting to it. Or maybe he was just too tired to care anymore. That night, lying in the darkness, Elias listened to the sounds of Naomi settling into bed in the next room. The rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed frame, the soft sigh as she found a comfortable position. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, sounds he'd never expected to hear in this house. He thought about Morrison's warning, about Garrett's machinations, about all the ways this fragile situation could fall apart. He should be worried. should be planning, strategizing, preparing for whatever came next. Instead, he just felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in 5 years, this house didn't feel quite so empty. The next day followed a similar pattern. Elias worked on the property while Naomi transformed the garden. They moved around each other in careful orbits, maintaining distance but always aware of where the other person was. They spoke more easily now, small exchanges about tasks and meals and weather. Nothing deep, nothing that required too much vulnerability, but enough to establish a rhythm. Naomi proved to be relentlessly capable. By noon of the second day, the garden looked transformed. Weeds gone, soil turned and amended, struggling plants coaxed back to health. She'd even started seeds in makeshift containers, anticipating a future harvest. "You're planning long term," Elias observed, watching her work. "Habit. Gardens take time. No point planting if you're not willing to stick around to see what grows." "Does that mean you're planning to stick around?" She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her face. "I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. But I figure even if I'm only here a few weeks, someone should benefit from the work. Might as well be you. You don't have to leave in a few weeks. I don't want to overstay my welcome." "You won't." She studied him with that intense gaze that always made him feel slightly exposed. "You're very certain about things, aren't you? Very black and white. Experience taught me that hesitation gets you killed. Better to decide and commit than to waffle and second guess. And you've decided I can stay. I've decided you're welcome as long as you want to be here. What you do with that decision is up to you." Naomi turned back to the garden, but Elias caught the slight smile on her face before she hit it. He felt an absurd sense of accomplishment at having put it there. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Elias spotted him while checking the water trough and felt his shoulders tense. The horse was moving fast, purposeful. Whoever it was had business here. He walked back to the house and found Naomi on the porch, shading her eyes against the sun as she watched the approaching rider. "Friend of yours?" she asked. "Nobody out here is a friend." The rider resolved into Frank Sullivan, one of Red Hollow's town councilmen. He was a barrel-chested man in his 40s who owned the feed store and thought his moderate success gave him authority over other people's lives. His expression as he pulled up to the house was grim. "Mercer," he said by way of greeting, not bothering to dismount. "Sullivan, what brings you out here?" "Council business. We need to talk about your situation." "My situation is none of the council's business." Sullivan's eyes flicked to Naomi, then back to Elias. "When it involves the welfare of a young woman, it becomes everyone's business. We have a responsibility to ensure she's being treated properly." "She's standing right there. You can ask her yourself." Sullivan looked uncomfortable but addressed Naomi directly. "Miss Hale, is it? Are you here of your own free will?" "I am," Naomi said clearly. "And Mr. Mercer hasn't threatened you or forced you to stay?" "No. He's been nothing but kind." "I see." Sullivan shifted in his saddle. "The problem, Miss Hale, is that this arrangement is highly irregular. An unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man, no chaperone, no family oversight. It's not proper." "Proper according to who?" Naomi's voice had an edge now. "The same people who watched me get humiliated and did nothing? Forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned with their opinion of what's proper. Now see here." "No, you see here." She stepped off the porch, and Elias noticed her hands were shaking slightly, even as her voice remained steady. "Mr. Garrett brought me to Red Hollow under false pretenses, then threw my belongings in the dirt like I was trash when I didn't meet his expectations. Not one person in that crowd offered assistance. Not one person suggested he was behaving improperly. But now that someone actually helped me, now you're all worried about propriety. Where was this concern yesterday?" Sullivan's face reddened. "Thomas Garrett is a respected member of this community. Thomas Garrett is a bully who punishes women for not meeting his fantasy expectations. And you're enabling him by coming out here and questioning the one person who actually showed me decency. The council has a duty to mind its own business," Elias cut in. "Naomi's an adult. She can make her own decisions about where she lives and who she lives with. Unless you've got a legal claim to make, you're trespassing on private property." Sullivan glared at him. "This isn't over, Mercer. The council's going to discuss this situation at our next meeting. We may need to take further action. Action like what? That remains to be seen. But I'd suggest you consider the optics of this arrangement, for everyone's sake. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in his wake. Naomi stood very still, watching him go. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, and Elias could see she was fighting to maintain composure. "That was well done," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "You had every right to lose your temper. He came here to intimidate you, and you didn't back down. That took courage." "It took anger. I'm so tired of men like him deciding what's acceptable for women like me, as if we're too stupid or fragile to make our own choices." "They're scared." "Of what?" "Of women who don't need their permission, of people like me who don't follow their rules. We represent something they can't control, and that terrifies them." Naomi turned to look at him. "What do you think the council will do?" "Don't know, but whatever it is, we'll deal with it." "We." She repeated the word slowly. "You keep saying we like we're a unit, like we're in this together. Aren't we?" "I suppose we are. It's just strange. 2 days ago I didn't know you existed. Now we're apparently fighting the town council together. Life moves fast out here." She laughed at that, a short, sharp sound that held more stress than humor. That's one way to put it. They went inside, and Naomi threw herself into preparing dinner with slightly more force than necessary, taking out her frustration on vegetables and dough. Elias gave her space, understanding the need to do something physical when emotions were running high. By the time they sat down to eat, she'd calmed somewhat, though tension still lined her shoulders. "I'm going to town tomorrow," Elias said, "like I planned. I'll probably hear more about this council situation while I'm there." "Should I come with you?" "Do you want to?" Naomi considered it. "Part of me does. Part of me wants to march into that town and dare them to say something to my face, but the practical part knows that would probably make things worse." "Probably. So I'll stay here. Work on the garden. Try not to imagine all the things people are saying. For what it's worth, I think you handled Sullivan perfectly. You showed him you're not some helpless victim who needs rescuing from me. That matters." "Does it? Or does it just confirm their worst assumptions, that I'm an improper woman living shamelessly with a dangerous man?" "Maybe, but at least they know you're doing it by choice. That has to count for something." Naomi pushed food around her plate. "I don't want to cause problems for you, Elias. If this gets bad enough that it threatens your property or your livelihood, it won't. You can't know that. Then we'll handle it if it does, together, like you said." She looked up at him with those sharp, assessing eyes. "Why are you being so stubborn about this?" "Because walking away would be easier, and I'm tired of taking the easy road. I brought you here. I'm responsible for you, and I don't quit on my responsibilities." "Even when those responsibilities might get you run out of town?" "Even then." They finished dinner in contemplative silence. Elias could feel the weight of tomorrow pressing down on him. Going to town meant facing whatever Garrett had stirred up, meant dealing with stares and whispers and possible confrontation. He'd been avoiding Red Hollow for years specifically to escape that kind of scrutiny. But they needed supplies. And more than that, he needed to show the town that he wasn't intimidated, that Naomi staying with him was happening regardless of their approval. Sometimes the only way forward was straight through the problem. Later, as he settled into his bedroll, Elias heard Naomi moving around in the bedroom. She was restless tonight, unable to find comfort. He understood. The confrontation with Sullivan had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "Naomi?" he called softly. "Yes?" "You all right?" A long pause, then, "No, but I will be. If you need to talk." "I don't, thank you, though." He heard her settle into bed finally, the old frame creaking under her weight. After a while, her breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Elias lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow would bring. He thought about Garrett's wounded pride, Sullivan's veiled threats, Morrison's warnings. He thought about the town council meeting and what further action might entail. Mostly he thought about the woman sleeping in the next room and how her presence had already changed everything. Elias left before dawn, wanting to reach town early before the heat and the crowds. Naomi was already awake when he came out of the bedroom after changing clothes, standing by the stove with coffee ready and a cloth-wrapped package of food for the road. "You didn't have to get up," he said, though he was grateful she had. I know, but I wanted to. She handed him the package and a tin cup of coffee. Be careful in town. I'm always careful. I mean it, Elias. If Garrett's been talking, if people are angry, I can handle angry people. That's what worries me. I don't want you handling them the way you used to handle things. She held his gaze. Promise me you won't do anything that gives them ammunition, no matter what they say. He wanted to tell her he couldn't promise that if someone pushed hard enough, he might push back harder. But the concern in her eyes stopped him. I'll do my best. That'll have to be good enough. She wrapped her arms around herself. How long will you be gone? 6 hours there and back, maybe 2 hours in town. I'll be home before dark. Home. The word slipped out naturally, and they both noticed it. Neither of them commented. Elias finished his coffee and headed out to the wagon. The morning air was cool and crisp, promising another scorching day once the sun climbed higher. He clicked his tongue and got the horses moving, and didn't look back because he knew if he did, he'd see Naomi watching from the porch, and he'd want to stay. The ride to Red Hollow felt longer than usual. Elias had too much time to think, too much space for worry to creep in. He kept replaying Sullivan's visit, the barely veiled threats, the way the councilman had looked at Naomi like she was property to be managed, rather than a person making her own choices. By the time the town came into view, Elias's jaw was tight and his mood was dark. Red Hollow looked the same as always. Tired buildings, dusty streets, people going about their business with grim determination. But today there was a different energy in the air. Heads turned as his wagon rolled down Main Street. Conversation stopped. People stared. Elias kept his expression neutral and his eyes forward. He pulled up in front of Anderson's general store and climbed down, aware of at least a dozen pairs of eyes tracking his movements. The store was busier than he'd expected for this early in the morning. Or maybe people had found reasons to be there specifically because they knew he was coming. Elias recognized the pattern. This was an ambush dressed up as coincidence. Jim Anderson stood behind the counter, his weathered face carefully neutral. Mercer, what can I do for you? Need supplies. Elias pulled out Naomi's lists. This is the essentials. I'll browse for the rest. Anderson took the paper and scanned it without comment. Around the store, people pretended to shop while actually listening to every word. This is a lot of food for one person, Anderson observed. Good thing I'm not one person anymore. So it's true then. You've got that woman out at your place. Her name is Naomi Hale. And yes, she's staying with me. A woman near the fabric shelves gasped softly. Martha Chen, the boarding house owner, stepped forward with righteous indignation written all over her face. Mr. Mercer, surely you understand how inappropriate that is. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, no proper supervision. Naomi's an adult who makes her own decisions. She doesn't need supervision. She needs protection from men who might take advantage of her vulnerable situation. Elias turned to face her fully. You mean men like Thomas Garrett, who humiliated her in front of the whole town? Where was your concern for her protection then, Mrs. Chen? Martha's face reddened. That's entirely different. It's not different at all. You all stood by and watched her get treated like trash. You didn't offer her a room at your boarding house. You didn't step in when she needed help. But now that someone else did, you're suddenly worried about her welfare? We're worried about her reputation, another woman chimed in. Sarah Brennan, the grocer's wife. Living with you like that, unmarried, unchaperoned, she'll be ruined. No decent man will have her. Maybe she doesn't want a decent man. Maybe she's tired of men deciding what's acceptable for her. It's not just about what she wants, Martha insisted. There are rules, social standards that exist for good reason. You can't just ignore them because you find them inconvenient. Watch me. The door banged open and Thomas Garrett walked in, his timing too perfect to be coincidental. He must have been watching for Elias's arrival. His face was flushed and his eyes glittered with vindication. There he is, the great protector. Garrett's voice dripped with sarcasm. Come to buy supplies with money that should be going toward the debt your little house guest owes me. She doesn't owe you anything. I paid for her train ticket. She agreed to marry me in exchange. She reneged on the agreement. That's a debt. You exposed her as a fraud before the whole town. Pretty sure that voids any agreement you think you had. I exposed her as a liar, which she is, and now you're harboring her, enabling her deception. Some might say you're complicit. Elias felt his temper rising, but remembered Naomi's words. Don't give them ammunition. He forced his voice to stay level. I'm providing shelter to someone who needed it. If you've got a legal problem with that, take it up with a lawyer. Oh, I intend to. The council's already discussing options. We can't have men like you taking advantage of vulnerable women. Men like me. Elias took a step toward Garrett. The merchant's bravado faltered slightly, but he held his ground. What exactly do you mean by that? You know what you are, Mercer. What you've done. You think we've forgotten. You think we're going to let a killer keep a young woman isolated on his ranch? No witnesses? No oversight? The store had gone completely silent. Even Anderson had stopped moving behind the counter. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Elias said quietly, dangerously, you better have proof before you say it out loud. I'm suggesting that a man with your history shouldn't be trusted with someone in Naomi Hale's position. I'm suggesting that the council has a responsibility to ensure her safety. Her safety from who? From me? Or from you and your wounded pride? My pride has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. You're embarrassed that she rejected you, embarrassed that I interfered, so now you're using the council to punish both of us. You don't care about Naomi's welfare. You care about your reputation. Garrett's face went dark red. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Then tell me, if you were so concerned about her welfare, why didn't you help her find appropriate lodging instead of throwing her belongings in the dirt? Why didn't you offer to arrange proper accommodation at Mrs. Chen's boarding house? Why was your first instinct humiliation instead of assistance? She lied to me. She disappointed you. There's a difference. And your response was to punish her publicly. You're angry because I stopped you from completing that punishment. The crowd was murmuring now, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads. Garrett looked around and seemed to realize he was losing control of the narrative. This conversation is pointless, he said stiffly. The council will handle this properly. We meet tomorrow night. I suggest you and your house guest prepare to answer some difficult questions. We'll answer whatever questions you want. Naomi's got nothing to hide. We'll see about that. Garrett pushed past Elias and stormed out of the store. The tension didn't leave with him. If anything, it intensified, all those watching eyes now focused entirely on Elias. Anderson cleared his throat. I'll get your supplies together. Take about 30 minutes. Fine. I'll wait outside. Elias walked out into the morning sun, feeling the weight of all those stares on his back. He leaned against his wagon and tried to calm the anger still simmering in his chest. That had gone about as badly as he'd expected, maybe worse. Garrett was more organized than he'd anticipated, more willing to use the council as a weapon. Doc Morrison appeared beside him, materializing out of the crowd like a ghost. That was quite a performance in there, Morrison said quietly. I didn't start it. No, but you sure as hell finished it. You made Garrett look like a fool in front of half the town. He is a fool. Maybe. But he's a fool with friends on the council and enough influence to cause real problems. You should have handled that more carefully. There's no careful way to handle a man who's determined to make you the villain. Morrison sighed. You're not wrong, but you're also not helping yourself. That speech about him punishing Naomi, you made good points, but you also reminded everyone that you're an outsider who doesn't respect their social rules. That's not going to win you allies. I don't need allies. I need people to leave us alone. That's not how small towns work, and you know it. You can't just exist on the periphery anymore. You brought Naomi into your life, which means you brought the town's attention with her. Now you have to deal with it. So what do you suggest? Honestly, I think you should marry her. Elias stared at him. Are you insane? Think about it. Most of the objections would disappear if you made it legal and proper. The council couldn't claim she was at risk because she'd be your wife. Garrett would lose his leverage because the situation would be socially acceptable, and Naomi would have legal protection and security. We barely know each other. Frontier marriages have been built on less. Hell, most mail-order marriages start with less than you two have. At least you've spent time together, know you can tolerate each other's company. That's not a reason to get married. No, but survival is. And right now, both of you need to survive this situation. Marriage would give you a path forward. Elias shook his head. I'm not going to pressure her into marriage just because the town can't mind its own business. She's been through enough without adding that kind of obligation. Then you better have another plan for tomorrow night's council meeting, because Garrett's going to push for something, and if you don't give them an acceptable solution, they'll impose their own. Like what? Like demanding she leave town, like requiring a chaperone, like investigating whether you're fit to have anyone living on your property. They have more power than you think, Mercer, especially when they're convinced they're protecting someone. Morrison walked away, leaving Elias alone with those uncomfortable thoughts. The idea of marrying Naomi was absurd. They were strangers who happened to be stuck in a complicated situation. Marriage required more than just tolerance and mutual understanding. It required trust, commitment, feelings neither of them had had time to develop. But Morrison's words nagged at him. What if the council did force Naomi to leave? What if they used their authority to separate them, to send her back to the street with nowhere to go? Elias had promised her safety, promised her a place to figure things out. He couldn't let the town take that away. He was still wrestling with these thoughts when Anderson emerged with his supplies. They loaded the wagon in tense silence, Anderson's usual small talk noticeably absent. Other townspeople watched from doorways and windows, their judgment palpable. Elias paid for his purchases, noting the inflated prices but not arguing. Pick your battles. He climbed onto the wagon and was about to leave when a young woman approached. She couldn't have been more than 20, with red hair and freckles and a determined set to her jaw. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "I'm Annie Walsh. I work at the saloon." Elias waited, not sure what this was about. "I just wanted to say what you did for Miss Hale, taking her in when nobody else would. That was decent. Not everyone thinks you're wrong." She glanced around nervously. "Some of us remember what it's like to be alone and desperate. We're grateful someone helped her. You could tell her that yourself if you wanted. Come visit sometime." "I don't think that's wise, not right now with everything so stirred up, but maybe later when things settle down." She stepped back. "Just wanted you to know not everyone's against you." She hurried away before Elias could respond. It was a small thing, barely more than a gesture, but it loosened something in his chest. Maybe the whole town wasn't united against them after all. The ride home felt even longer than the ride in. Elias's mind churned over everything that had happened. The confrontation with Garrett, Morrison's suggestion, Annie Walsh's quiet support. He thought about the council meeting tomorrow night, about what they might demand, about how to protect Naomi from their interference. By the time the ranch came into view, he still didn't have any answers. Naomi was in the garden when he pulled up, but she dropped her tools and came running when she saw the wagon. Her face was tight with worry. "How bad was it?" "Bad enough." Elias climbed down and started unloading supplies. "Garrett was waiting for me, made a scene in front of half the town." "What did he say?" "That you owe him money, that I'm taking advantage of you, that the council's going to intervene." He carried a sack of flour toward the house. Naomi followed, wringing her hands. "I knew this would happen. I knew it would get worse." "It's going to get worse still. Council's meeting tomorrow night. Morrison thinks they're going to push for something, either requiring a chaperone or forcing you to leave." Naomi stopped walking. "Leave? But where would I go?" "That's not their problem. They just want the situation resolved in a way that satisfies their sense of propriety." "So after everything, I still end up homeless." "Perfect." Elias set down the flour and turned to face her. "That's not going to happen. I won't let it happen." "How are you going to stop them?" "I don't know yet, but I will." They finished unloading in tense silence. Naomi helped him organize the supplies, her movements jerky with stress. When everything was put away, she sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. "I should have stayed on that train, found some other town, tried somewhere else, and ended up in the same situation just with different names. Maybe, but at least I wouldn't have dragged you into this mess." "I dragged myself into it. That was my choice." She looked up at him, eyes red-rimmed. "Why are you being so stubborn about this? Why won't you just admit this was a mistake and cut your losses?" "Because it wasn't a mistake. And because giving up now would prove Garrett right, that neither of us is worth defending." "Maybe we're not." "Don't." Elias's voice came out harsher than he intended. "Don't let him get in your head like that. You're worth 10 of Thomas Garrett, and he knows it. That's why he's trying so hard to tear you down." Naomi's laugh was bitter. "I'm a penniless seamstress with no family and no prospects. What exactly makes me worth anything? The fact that you survived. The fact that you kept going when everything fell apart. The fact that you're sitting here fighting instead of giving up. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Morrison suggested something today. It's probably a terrible idea, but I want you to hear it anyway. What kind of terrible idea? He thinks we should get married. The words hung in the air between them. Naomi stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Married. It would solve most of the problems. Council couldn't object if we made it legal and proper. Garrett would lose his leverage. You'd have protection and security. And you'd be stuck with a wife you don't want. I didn't say I don't want. Elias stopped himself. The point is, it would work. Practically speaking. Practically speaking. Naomi repeated the words slowly. You want to marry me for practical reasons. I'm saying it's an option, one we should consider. No. Naomi, no. She stood up abruptly. I didn't come all this way to trap some man into marriage because it's convenient. I won't do that to you, and I won't do it to myself. It's not trapping if we both agree. It is trapping. You're a decent person who feels responsible for me, so you'd go through with it, even though it's not what you want. And I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I was an obligation you took on to satisfy a town council. That's not a marriage. That's a prison. So what's your alternative? I don't know. But it's not this. She was pacing now, agitated. Marriage should mean something. It should be about more than just solving a problem. In case you haven't noticed, we don't have the luxury of idealism right now. Maybe not, but I have the luxury of self-respect, and I'm not throwing it away just because some busybodies think I'm improper. Elias felt frustration rising. So you'd rather risk being forced out, sent back to the street, just to maintain some principle about what marriage should be? Yes, because if I don't have principles, if I don't have my own standards for how I live my life, then what's the point? I might as well have stayed with Garrett, let him treat me however he wanted, because at least that would have been practical. That's not the same thing, and you know it. It feels the same to me. It feels like I'm supposed to compromise who I am to make things easier for everyone else. And I'm tired of doing that, Elias. I'm so tired. Her voice broke on the last word. She turned away, hiding her face, but her shoulders were shaking. Elias stood up slowly, not sure what to do with her tears, with his own frustration, with this whole impossible situation. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I shouldn't have suggested it. You're right. It was a terrible idea. It was a practical idea, which makes it worse somehow, like we're just problems to be managed instead of people with feelings and wants and dreams. She wiped her eyes angrily. I know you're trying to help. I know you're doing everything you can, but I can't marry you just to satisfy Red Hollow. I can't. Okay, then we won't. Just like that? Just like that. You said no. That's the end of it. She turned to look at him, surprise written on her face. You're not going to argue? Try to convince me? What would be the point? You've made your position clear. I'm not going to pressure you into something you don't want. Even if it makes everything harder? Even then. Naomi let out a long, shaky breath. Thank you. For what? For respecting my answer, for not pushing. That matters more than you probably realize. They stood there in uncomfortable silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. Elias wanted to tell her he understood her resistance, that he admired her refusal to compromise her principles, but the words felt too big, too revealing of feelings he wasn't ready to examine. I'll figure something else out, he said instead. Some other way to handle the council. What if there isn't another way? Then we'll deal with whatever happens. Together. You keep saying that. Together. Like we're a team. Aren't we? I'm starting to think we are. Which is strange, given how little time we've known each other. Time doesn't always matter. Sometimes you just know when someone's worth standing beside. Naomi's expression softened. Is that what I am to you? Worth standing beside? Yes. The simplicity of his answer seemed to affect her deeply. She crossed the room and did something unexpected. She hugged him. It was brief, awkward, neither of them quite sure where to put their hands. But it was real, an acknowledgement of whatever bond was forming between them. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. Sorry, that was forward of me. Don't apologize, I don't mind. They moved apart self-consciously, both suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing. Elias cleared his throat and gestured toward the supplies. I got everything on your lists, plus some extras I thought might be useful. Thank you. I'll make something good for dinner tonight. We could both use comfort food. She threw herself into cooking with focused intensity, and Elias retreated to the porch to give her space. He sat on the steps, watching the sun track across the sky, and tried to figure out what to do next. Morrison's suggestion had been rejected, which left them vulnerable to whatever the council decided. He could refuse to comply with their demands, but that might make things worse for Naomi in the long run. The problem was he'd promised her safety, promised her time to figure things out, and he was running out of ways to keep that promise. That evening, they ate Naomi's comfort food, some kind of stew with dumplings that reminded Elias of meals from his childhood, back when his mother was alive and home meant warmth instead of emptiness. They talked carefully around the elephant in the room, discussing the garden, the ranch, anything except tomorrow's council meeting. When darkness fell and Naomi retreated to the bedroom, Elias lay on his floor pallet and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. His mind kept circling back to the same problem: how to protect Naomi from a town determined to impose their will. He must have dozed eventually because he woke suddenly to the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast, close to the house. Elias was on his feet instantly, knife in hand, moving to the window. Torches. At least a dozen riders carrying torches, surrounding the house in a loose circle. Elias's blood ran cold. "Naomi," he called quietly but urgently. "Get up, we have trouble." She emerged from the bedroom, eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" "We have visitors, unfriendly ones." He moved to the door, staying behind the frame. "Stay back from the windows." "Mercer," a voice called from outside. Thomas Garrett's voice, slightly slurred like he'd been drinking. "We need to talk." "It's 3 a.m, Elias shouted back. "Whatever you need to say can wait until tomorrow." "No, it can't. We've been talking in town, some of us. We've decided this situation needs to be resolved tonight." "By some of us, you mean you and whoever you could convince to come along on this idiot mission?" "I mean concerned citizens who understand that we can't wait for a formal council meeting when a woman's virtue is at stake." "Naomi's virtue is her own business. Go home, Garrett. Send her out. We'll escort her back to town, find her proper lodging. You can go back to your solitary life and everyone wins." "I'm not going anywhere," Naomi shouted from behind Elias. "You don't get to decide where I live." "Miss Hale, please be reasonable," another voice called. Frank Sullivan. "We're trying to help you. A woman in your position needs protection, proper supervision. I don't need protection from Elias. I need protection from men like you who think you have the right to control my life." "This is pointless," Garrett said. "Mercer, if you don't send her out, we're coming in." Elias felt cold rage settle over him. "You take one step toward this house and you'll regret it. There's 12 of us and one of you. Don't be stupid." "I don't need to outnumber you. I just need to make sure the first man through that door doesn't leave alive. You want to volunteer, Garrett?" Silence. The torches flickered in the darkness. Elias could see faces now: Garrett, Sullivan, a few other men he recognized. Some looked uncertain, uncomfortable with how this was playing out. Others looked determined, convinced they were doing something righteous. "You can't threaten us," Sullivan tried. "We have the law on our side. You have a mob with torches at 3 a.m. That's not law, that's vigilantism. And I'm well within my rights to defend my property and my guest from trespassers. Your guest is a free woman making her own choices. If she wants to leave with you, she can walk out that door right now. But if she chooses to stay, you need to respect that choice and get off my land." All eyes turned to Naomi. She stepped forward, visible in the doorway beside Elias, her chin lifted defiantly. "I'm staying. This is where I choose to be. I'm not asking for your approval or your help. I'm telling you to leave." Garrett's face twisted with anger. "You don't understand what you're doing. You don't understand what he is." "I understand perfectly. He's the only person in Red Hollow who treated me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed. That's more than I can say for any of you. Miss Hale, leave, now, before this gets worse for everyone." The riders shifted uncertainly. Some of the torches were lowering. Sullivan and Garrett exchanged looks, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. "The council will hear about this," Sullivan threatened. "Good," Elias said. "Tell them exactly what happened. Tell them you came to my property in the middle of the night with torches and threats." Tell them you tried to force a woman to leave against her will. Let's see how righteous that sounds in the daylight." More hesitation. Then slowly, reluctantly, the riders began backing away. Garrett held his ground longest, his face dark with frustrated rage. But eventually even he turned his horse and rode off, the others following. Elias and Naomi stood in the doorway until the last torch disappeared into the darkness. Only then did Elias let out the breath he'd been holding. His hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline still flooding his system. "That was close," he said quietly. "Too close." Naomi's voice was unsteady. "They were really going to force me to leave. They were going to try. Wouldn't have succeeded. You would have fought them. All of them. If I had to." She turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the house he could see tears on her cheeks. "You would have killed for me. To keep me safe." "Yes. That's insane. You barely know me." "Doesn't matter. You're under my protection. That means something to me, even if it means nothing to them." Naomi let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I don't understand you at all, Elias Mercer." "I don't understand myself half the time." They went back inside and Elias checked all the windows, making sure everything was secure. He didn't think Garrett would come back tonight, but he'd learned long ago not to assume anything when it came to angry men with wounded pride. Naomi sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of water, staring at nothing. She looked shaken, but also strangely energized, like the confrontation had crystallized something for her. "This isn't going to end, is it?" she said finally. "They're not going to give up." "Probably not." "So what do we do?" Elias sat across from her. "We go to that council meeting tomorrow and we make our case. We explain the situation clearly, show them you're here by choice, and dare them to do something about it. And if they do, then we figure out what comes next. But Naomi, whatever happens, you need to know you have options. If this gets too dangerous, if they push too hard, you can leave. Find somewhere else. Somewhere safer. Run away, you mean. Survive. There's no shame in that. There is if I'm running from the one place where someone actually cares what happens to me." She met his eyes. "I'm not leaving, Elias. Not unless you tell me to go." "I'm not going to tell you to go." "Then we see this through. Together." "Together," he agreed. They sat there in the quiet house, two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives by accident and were now bound together by circumstances neither had chosen. Outside, the prairie night pressed close, full of unseen threats and uncertain futures. But inside, for just this moment, they had each other. And somehow, that felt like enough. Neither of them slept much after the riders left. Elias kept watch from the window while Naomi tried to rest, though he could hear her tossing restlessly in the bedroom. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale orange, they were both exhausted and on edge. The council meeting was set for 7 that evening at the schoolhouse. That gave them the whole day to prepare, which somehow made it worse. Too much time to worry, too much time to imagine how badly things could go. Naomi made breakfast, but neither of them ate much. They moved around each other carefully, like two people bracing for impact, but not sure when or how it would come. "We should go early," Elias said, pushing his half-eaten eggs around his plate. "Get there before the crowd. Claim our space." "Will there be a crowd?" "After last night? Definitely. Half the town will show up just to see what happens." Naomi set down her fork. "I need to tell you something about why I really left Philadelphia." Elias looked up, surprised by the sudden confession. "I told you about my father's debts, about working myself to exhaustion. That was all true. But there was more." She took a shaky breath. "My landlord, Mr. Fisher, he started coming around more often after my mother died, offering to reduce my rent if I was friendly. At first I pretended not to understand what he meant. Then I pretended I didn't hear him, but he got more insistent, more direct. One night he let himself into my room while I was sleeping. Elias felt rage ignite in his chest, hot and immediate. "He didn't. I fought him off before, but it was close. Too close. And I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried again. So I left. Used every penny I had saved for a train ticket and answered the first mail-order bride advertisement I found. I was so desperate to get away that I didn't care where I ended up." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out I should have cared more. You did what you had to do to survive. I lied to Garrett, not about having money, but about why I was really coming west. I painted myself as this respectable woman seeking a fresh start, when the truth is I was running away from a man who thought he could buy me with reduced rent. Some fresh start. None of that makes you a liar. It makes you a survivor. The town won't see it that way. If this comes out tonight, if Garrett somehow finds out, he won't. And even if he does, it doesn't change anything. You were in danger and you protected yourself. Anyone with half a brain would understand that. You have more faith in people than I do. I have faith in you. That's enough. She looked at him with such raw gratitude that it made his chest ache. Why are you like this? Why do you keep believing in me when everyone else has written me off? Because I know what it's like to be written off. To have people look at you and see only your worst moments, your biggest mistakes. I know how that feels, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Is that really the only reason? Elias hesitated. The truth was more complicated, more tangled up with feelings he wasn't ready to examine. But Naomi deserved some honesty after what she'd just shared. No. It's also because you're stubborn and brave, and you don't let anyone tell you what you're worth. You remind me of who I wish I'd been at your age, someone who fought instead of giving in. I don't feel very brave. Brave people never do. That's how you know it's real bravery and not just arrogance. They cleaned up breakfast in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As the day crept toward evening, tension built like a storm about to break. Naomi changed into her best dress, the one she'd been saving, and pinned her hair up with extra care. Elias put on his cleanest shirt and tried to tame his hair into something respectable. At 6:30, they climbed into the wagon and headed toward town. The ride felt surreal, like they were traveling toward their own trial. The sun was just beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the prairie. Red Hollow was bustling when they arrived. Horses and wagons lined Main Street, far more than usual for an evening council meeting. Elias had been right. This was going to be a spectacle. They walked toward the schoolhouse together, and conversation stopped as people noticed them. Whispers followed in their wake. Elias kept his hand on Naomi's elbow, a gesture of support and solidarity. The schoolhouse was packed. Every bench was full, people standing along the walls, crowding the doorway. The council sat at a table at the front, 5 men including Frank Sullivan, all wearing expressions of grim determination. Thomas Garrett sat in the first row, practically vibrating with vindication. Doc Morrison caught Elias's eye from the side of the room and gave a small nod. At least one person was on their side. Sullivan banged a gavel. "This meeting will come to order. We're here tonight to address the situation involving Elias Mercer and Miss Naomi Hale. Mr. Mercer, Miss Hale, please come forward." They walked to the front of the room, every eye tracking their movement. Elias could feel Naomi trembling slightly beside him, but her chin was up and her spine was straight. She was terrified but refusing to show it. "Mr. Mercer," Sullivan began, "you've been harboring Miss Hale at your ranch for several days now in what can only be described as highly irregular circumstances. The council has received multiple complaints about the propriety of this arrangement." "From who?" Elias asked. "Garrett?" "From concerned citizens who believe Miss Hale's welfare may be at risk." "Then ask her yourself. She's standing right here." Sullivan turned to Naomi. "Miss Hale, are you at Mr. Mercer's ranch of your own free will?" "I am." "Has he threatened you or coerced you in any way?" "No, he's been nothing but kind and respectful." "I see." Sullivan didn't look particularly convinced. "And you understand that your current living situation is considered improper by most standards of decent society?" "I understand that some people have opinions about how I should live my life. I don't agree with those opinions." A murmur ran through the crowd. Martha Chen stood up from her seat. "Miss Hale, surely you must see how this looks. An unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man, no chaperone, no family supervision. Your reputation is being destroyed." "My reputation was destroyed the moment Thomas Garrett threw my belongings in the dirt," Naomi said clearly. "At least now I'm being judged for a choice I actually made, rather than for disappointing a man's false expectations." Garrett jumped to his feet. "You lied to me. You presented yourself as something you weren't." "I presented myself as a seamstress who could work and contribute to a household. You invented a fantasy about money and connections that I never claimed to have. That's your failure, not mine. You still owe me for that train ticket. You publicly humiliated me and destroyed any agreement we might have had. I don't owe you anything." Sullivan banged his gavel. "Order." This isn't a debate about the train ticket. We're here to discuss the current living arrangement and whether it's acceptable. Acceptable to who? Elias cut in. Because it's acceptable to Naomi and it's acceptable to me. We're the only two people whose opinions should matter. That's where you're wrong, Mr. Mercer. We're a community, and communities have standards. We can't simply ignore those standards because they're inconvenient. You mean the same standards that allowed everyone to stand by while Garrett treated Naomi like trash? Those standards? That's a separate issue. It's the same damn issue. You all watched her get humiliated and did nothing, but now that someone actually helped her, you're falling all over yourselves to interfere. You don't care about her welfare. You care about maintaining your sense of moral superiority. The crowd erupted in competing shouts. Some people were nodding in agreement, others yelling objections. Sullivan banged the gavel repeatedly until the noise died down. Mr. Mercer, you're not helping your case by being antagonistic. The council is prepared to offer a compromise that would address everyone's concerns. What kind of compromise? Miss Hale would be placed with a respectable family in town. Mrs. Chen has offered to take her in at the boarding house. She would be provided with proper accommodations and supervision while she seeks employment or makes other arrangements. No, Naomi said immediately. Miss Hale, please be reasonable. I said no. I'm not interested in your compromise. I have accommodations that suit me perfectly fine. Accommodations that are destroying your reputation. Then my reputation will be destroyed. That's my choice to make. Sarah Brennan stood up now, her face flushed with emotion. How can you be so foolish? Don't you understand what people will think? What they'll say about you? I understand perfectly. They'll say I'm improper and shameless and probably worse. But at least I'll be saying those things about choices I actually made, in a place where I'm treated with respect. Naomi's voice was shaking now, but growing stronger. Do you know what it's like to be truly desperate? To have no options, no safety, no one who cares whether you live or die? I do. I spent months in Philadelphia working myself sick, dodging a landlord who thought he could force himself on me, watching my father drink himself to death because he couldn't face life without my mother. I came west because I had nothing left to lose. And when I got here, when Garrett exposed me as having failed to meet his fantasy, not one person offered help. Not one. Mom ki chetsom. The schoolhouse had gone completely silent. People were listening now, really listening. Elias Mercer stepped forward when no one else would. He gave me shelter, safety, and dignity when I had none of those things. He asked for nothing in return. He treated me like a human being instead of a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. And you want me to leave that situation and move into town where I'll be under constant supervision, constantly judged, constantly reminded that I'm charity case? No, I won't do it. Miss Hale. Sullivan tried, but Naomi wasn't finished. I know what you all think of me. You think I'm desperate and improper and probably immoral. You think Elias must have some sinister motive for helping me. But the truth is simpler and sadder than any of your assumptions. He helped me because he recognized suffering and couldn't walk away from it. And I stayed because for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered to someone. That's it. That's the whole scandalous story. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She just stood there, exposed and vulnerable and absolutely defiant. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Then Annie Walsh, the young woman from the saloon, stood up. I think Miss Hale should be allowed to make her own choices, Annie said quietly. We all act like women need constant protection and supervision, but what we really mean is that we need to control them. Because women who make their own choices are frightening to people who benefit from them not having choices. That's absurd, Martha Chen started, but Annie kept talking. Is it? Mrs. Chen, you run a boarding house where you set all the rules about when women can come and go, who they can see, how they should behave. You profit from that control. Mr. Garrett wanted a wife who would meet his expectations and not challenge him. When Miss Hale turned out to be a real person with her own thoughts and needs, he punished her for it. All of this, she gestured around the room. This whole meeting is about punishing people who refuse to follow rules designed to keep them in their place. That's enough, Miss Walsh, Sullivan warned. Actually, I don't think it is enough. I think we need to be honest about what this is really about. Miss Hale made a choice that inconveniences the social order we all benefit from. And rather than accepting that she has the right to make that choice, we're trying to force her into compliance by claiming it's for her own good. Doc Morrison stood up now. Annie's right. I've been practicing medicine in this town for 15 years, and I've seen plenty of respectable households where terrible things happen behind closed doors. I've also seen people living outside society's rules who treat each other with more genuine care and respect. Respectability isn't the same as decency, and we shouldn't confuse the two. More people were standing now, the room dividing visibly between those who agreed and those who didn't. Garrett was nearly purple with rage. This is outrageous. Are we just going to ignore all standards of proper behavior? Let anyone do whatever they want? We're saying that two adults should be allowed to live their lives without a committee deciding what's best for them, Morrison shot back. Unless you can prove actual harm is being done, the council has no business interfering. The harm is to Miss Hale's reputation. My reputation is mine to manage, Naomi said, her voice steadier now. Not yours. Sullivan was looking increasingly uncomfortable. The meeting had gotten away from him, spiraling into a debate about far bigger issues than just Elias and Naomi's living arrangement. He conferred quietly with the other council members while the crowd continued arguing among themselves. Finally, he banged the gavel. The council needs to deliberate. Everyone wait here. The 5 council members retreated to a back room. The wait felt interminable. Elias stood close to Naomi, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel his presence. She was shaking slightly, the adrenaline of her speech wearing off and leaving exhaustion in its wake. You were incredible, Elias said quietly. I was desperate. There's a difference. No, you told them the truth and forced them to hear it. That took real courage. I don't feel courageous, I feel terrified. Same thing, remember? She managed a weak smile at that. Around them, people were still debating in heated whispers. Elias caught Doc Morrison's eye again, and the doctor gave him a slight nod. He thought it had gone well. Annie Walsh was talking quietly with several other young women, all of them looking emboldened by what had just happened. 20 minutes later, the council filed back in. Sullivan's expression was carefully neutral. The council has reached a decision, he announced. After much deliberation, we've concluded that while Mr. Mercer and Miss Hale's living arrangement is highly irregular and not one we would typically condone, we cannot in good conscience force Miss Hale to leave when she has clearly stated she is there by choice and is not being harmed. Relief flooded through Elias so intensely it was almost painful. However, Sullivan continued, we strongly encourage both parties to consider making their arrangement more formal and proper. We also want it stated for the record that the council reserves the right to revisit this decision if we receive credible evidence that Miss Hale's welfare is at risk. That's it? Garrett exploded. You're just going to let this continue? Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, Mr. Garrett, yes. Miss Hale is an adult who has made her choice. The council respects that, even if we don't agree with it. This is insane! You're setting a dangerous precedent. The precedent we're setting, one of the other council members cut in, a man named James Worth, is that we trust adults to make their own decisions unless there's clear cause for intervention. I don't see that clear cause here. Garrett looked around wildly, seeking support, but found it lacking. Even those who'd been on his side seemed tired of the fight, ready for this whole mess to be over. He stormed toward the door, shoving past people who didn't move fast enough. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, people arguing and discussing and dissecting what had just happened. Elias and Naomi stood frozen, almost unable to believe they'd won. Morrison appeared beside them. You should leave now, before anyone changes their mind or things get heated again. Thank you, Elias said, for speaking up. Thank Annie and the others. They're the ones who shifted the mood. I just provided medical perspective. He looked at Naomi. You did well tonight, Miss Hale. Not many people could have handled that pressure with such grace. I didn't feel graceful. I felt like I was drowning. Exactly. But you kept swimming anyway. That's what matters. They made their way out through the crowd, fielding comments and stares and the occasional word of support. When they finally reached the wagon, Elias felt like he could breathe properly for the first time in hours. They rode in silence for the first few miles, both too overwhelmed to speak. The prairie stretched out around them, dark and vast under the emerging stars. It was only when the lights of town had disappeared completely that Naomi finally broke down. She cried like something had broken open inside her, huge gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop and just sat beside her, letting her cry, not trying to fix it or minimize it. She'd earned these tears. When she finally wound down to hiccuping breaths, she wiped her face with her sleeve. Sorry, that was... Don't apologize. You held it together through all of that. You're allowed to fall apart now. I thought we were going to lose. I was so sure they'd force me to leave. So was I. But we didn't lose. We actually won. She laughed wetly. I can't quite believe it. Believe it. You stood up in front of the whole town and told them the truth. That changed everything. I told them I was desperate and broken and barely surviving. Some victory. You told them you were human, that you deserved respect and dignity regardless of your circumstances. And enough people heard you that it mattered. Elias picked up the reins again. That's more than a victory. That's revolution on a small scale. They continued home in more comfortable silence. When the ranch house came into view, Naomi let out a long breath. I didn't realize how much this place has started to feel like home until I thought I might lose it. You're not losing it. It's yours for as long as you want it. What if I want it for a long time? What if I want to stay indefinitely? Elias felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Then you stay. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. No, but maybe it doesn't have to be complicated either. They arrived back at the house and Elias unhitched the horses while Naomi went inside to light the lamps. By the time he joined her, she'd already started making tea, moving around the kitchen with familiar ease. I've been thinking, she said as she poured water into cups, about what you said earlier, about marriage. Elias froze. Naomi, let me finish. I said no before because I didn't want to trap you into something you didn't want, and I stand by that. But I've been wondering if maybe the problem isn't the idea of marriage itself, but the reason behind it. If we were doing it just to satisfy the town, that would be wrong. But what if we were doing it for ourselves? What if we decided that we actually want to build something together? Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying, I don't know yet, but I want to figure it out. I want time to see if this, she gestured between them, whatever this is, could become something more, something real. I want that too. You do? I didn't realize it until you said it, but yes, you've been here less than a week, and already this house feels different, better. Like it's actually a home instead of just a place I sleep. I'd like to see where that goes. Naomi smiled, tentative and hopeful. So we have time then, time to figure things out without the town breathing down our necks. All the time you need. They drank their tea in the quiet kitchen, two people who'd been strangers less than a week ago and were now something else entirely. Not quite friends, not quite more, but definitely something. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, lightning flickering in distant clouds. But inside, the house was warm and safe, and theirs. Elias thought about the long road that had brought him here. The violence, the guilt, the years of isolation trying to outrun his past. He'd never expected redemption, never thought he deserved it. But maybe redemption wasn't something you earned through suffering. Maybe it was something you built, one small choice at a time, with someone who saw past your worst self to something better. Thank you, Naomi said softly, for everything, for believing in me when no one else did. Thank you for staying, for fighting, for being stubborn enough not to let them break you. We're quite a pair. Yeah, we are. The storm broke around midnight, rain hammering on the roof and wind rattling the shutters. Elias lay on his floor pallet listening to it, feeling oddly peaceful despite the chaos outside. They'd survived tonight, they'd won, and more importantly, they'd done it together. In the bedroom, Naomi lay awake listening to the same storm and thinking similar thoughts. She'd come west expecting marriage to a merchant, and had ended up with something completely different, a partnership with a broken man in a broken house, trying to build something whole. It wasn't what she'd planned, it wasn't what she'd imagined, but somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The storm passed by morning, leaving the prairie washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Elias woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of Naomi already moving around in the kitchen. He lay there for a moment, listening to her hum softly while she worked, and realized something had fundamentally shifted. The tension that had wound them both tight for days had finally loosened. They'd survived the town's judgment. Now they had to figure out what came next. Over breakfast, they didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable in a way it hadn't been before. Naomi seemed lighter somehow, like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying. Elias caught himself watching her more than he should, noticing small things, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the half smile that appeared when something amused her. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About?" "About how strange it is that a week ago I didn't know you existed, and now I can't imagine this house without you in it." She set down her coffee cup carefully. "That scares you." "Everything scares me lately, but not in a bad way. More like I spent 5 years making sure I didn't need anyone, and now suddenly I do need someone and I don't know what to do with that." "I know the feeling." Naomi traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "I told myself after my mother died that I'd never depend on anyone again, that needing people only led to getting hurt. But then you came along and messed up all my careful planning. Sorry about that." "Don't be. I think maybe I needed my planning messed up." They cleaned up breakfast together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with increasing ease. Elias was heading out to check on the barn when Naomi called after him. "Elias, there's something I've been wanting to say but haven't found the right moment for." He turned back. "What is it?" "I want to stay. Not just until I figure things out or until something better comes along. I want to make this my home, really make it mine. If that's all right with you." "More than all right. But Naomi, you should know, staying here means dealing with more judgment from town, more whispers, probably more problems. It's not going to get easier just because we survived one council meeting." "I know, but running away doesn't make things easier either. It just moves the problems somewhere else." She crossed her arms, defensive but determined. "I'm tired of running. I want to stand still for once. Build something instead of always surviving." "Then we build something together." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Together meant commitment. It meant planning for a shared future instead of just getting through each day. It meant acknowledging that whatever was growing between them was real and worth protecting. "I should probably tell you," Elias said slowly, "that I'm not good at this. Relationships, emotions, any of it. I spent so many years shutting everything down that I don't really know how to open back up." "That's all right. I'm not good at it either. We can be bad at it together." He laughed, surprising himself. "That might be the most honest relationship proposal I've ever heard." "Was that a proposal?" "Because if it was terrible." "No, that wasn't a proposal. When I propose, you'll know it." The words came out before he'd thought them through. They both froze, realizing what he'd just implied. Not if, but when. Naomi's eyes widened, and for a moment Elias thought he'd overstepped, pushed too fast, assumed too much. Then she smiled. "Good, because I have standards for proposals, and we can be bad at relationships together doesn't meet them." The tension broke and they both laughed, the kind of nervous laughter that comes from dancing around feelings too big to name directly. Elias escaped to the barn, needing space to process what had just happened. He'd more or less told Naomi he intended to marry her eventually. Not because the town demanded it, not because it was practical, but because somewhere in the chaos of the past week, he'd started caring about her in ways that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He was mucking out stalls when he heard horses approaching. His hand went instinctively to the knife on his belt before he recognized Doc Morrison's mount. The doctor was alone this time, which Elias took as a good sign. "Morning, Mercer," Morrison called, dismounting. "Hope I'm not intruding." "You're always intruding, but you're welcome anyway." Morrison smiled at that. "I wanted to check in after last night, make sure you both were all right. That was quite a performance." "Naomi's performance, not mine. She's the one who changed everyone's minds." "Maybe. But you standing there beside her mattered too. Showed people this wasn't a predator and his victim situation. It was two people choosing each other despite what anyone else thought." "Is that what you came out here to say?" "Partly. Also wanted to let you know that Garrett left town this morning. Packed up his shop and headed back east. Apparently he decided Red Hollow wasn't hospitable to his business anymore." Elias felt a weight lift he hadn't fully acknowledged was there. "So it's over. That part of it, yes. But Mercer, you need to understand that winning one battle doesn't mean you've won the war. Some people in town are still uncomfortable with your arrangement. They're not going to cause trouble like Garrett did, but they're watching, waiting to see what happens next." Let them watch. We're not doing anything wrong. I know that, but perception matters out here. You might want to consider making things more official sooner rather than later. Not because you have to, but because it might make life easier for both of you. Naomi and I are figuring things out at our own pace. Fair enough? Just don't take too long. The town's extended you grace for now, but that grace has limits. Morrison climbed back on his horse. One more thing. Annie Walsh and some of the other young women are planning to visit Naomi in a few days. They were inspired by her courage last night, wanted to show their support. Naomi would probably like that. She could use some friends. Couldn't we all? Morrison tipped his hat. You take care, Mercer, and tell Miss Hale that half the town is rooting for her, even if they can't say so out loud. After Morrison left, Elias stood in the barn doorway thinking about everything the doctor had said, making things official. He'd been circling that idea for days now, approaching it from different angles, trying to figure out what he actually wanted versus what circumstances demanded. The truth was, he wanted to marry Naomi, not because Red Hollow expected it, not because it solved problems, but because in one short week she'd become essential to him in ways he couldn't fully explain. She'd reminded him that he was capable of feeling things besides guilt and regret. That redemption might be possible after all. But wanting something and knowing how to get it were different things entirely. He was still wrestling with these thoughts when Naomi appeared, carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. Morrison was here? She asked. Yeah, brought news. Garrett left town. Her face registered surprise, then relief. Just like that? Just like that. Apparently he decided Red Hollow wasn't worth staying for. Good riddance. She set down the basket. Does that mean it's really over? We can stop waiting for the next crisis? Morrison seems to think so, though he also suggested we should consider making things official. Marriage, he means. Of course he does. Everyone's so concerned with making us proper. She sighed. I know it would be easier. I know it would solve problems. But Elias, I don't want to get married because it's easier. I want to get married because we can't imagine not being married. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. And for what it's worth, I think we're getting there. Not quite there yet, but close. Close enough that you told me when instead of if earlier. He felt heat rise in his face. You noticed that. Of course I noticed. It was possibly the sweetest and most presumptuous thing anyone's ever said to me. Want me to take it back? Absolutely not. I'm holding you to it. She picked up her basket again. But I'm also not going to rush you. We both need time to be sure this is what we want, not just what circumstances have pushed us toward. How'd you get so wise? Desperation teaches you to see things clearly. When you have nothing left to lose, you stop lying to yourself about what matters. She headed back to the house, leaving Elias with even more to think about. She was right, of course. They needed time. But he was also starting to realize that the time they needed wasn't to figure out if they wanted each other. He already knew the answer to that. The time was to figure out how to trust that wanting, how to believe they deserved something good after everything they'd been through. The next few days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Naomi worked on the garden while Elias tackled long-neglected repairs around the property. They cooked together, ate together, spent evenings on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. The physical attraction that had been simmering beneath everything else started surfacing more often. Brushed hands, lingering looks, moments where they stood closer than necessary, and neither moved away. One evening, Elias found Naomi standing by the garden, staring at something in her hands. As he approached, he saw it was a small bundle of fabric. What's that? Scraps from my sewing kit. I was thinking I could make curtains for the house, make it feel more like home. But then I realized I was planning like I was going to be here for years, and it made me nervous. She looked up at him. Is it stupid to plan for a future we haven't actually agreed on? No. It's hope, and we could both use more of that. I've spent so long not hoping for anything. It's uncomfortable, like I'm setting myself up for disappointment. Elias took the fabric from her hands and examined it. Simple cotton, nothing fancy, but she was right. Curtains would make the place feel more finished, more intentional. Make the curtains, he said. Plan for years. Be uncomfortable. I'll be uncomfortable right alongside you. She laughed, but her eyes were wet. You know what the scary part is? I'm starting to believe this might actually work, that we might actually get to keep this. What changed your mind? A lot of small things. The way you leave coffee ready for me in the mornings. How you fix the squeaky floorboard in the bedroom without me asking. The fact that you sleep on the hard floor every night and never complain. You're building a life around my presence, even though we haven't defined what that presence means yet. That tells me more than words ever could. Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he did the only thing that felt right. He pulled her into his arms and held her. She melted against him, and they stood there in the fading light, two broken people holding each other together. I'm going to build something, he said quietly. A surprise. Don't come into the barn for a few days. What kind of surprise? The kind you'll have to wait for. True to his word, Elias disappeared into the barn every evening after dinner. Naomi could hear him working, sawing, hammering, the occasional curse when something didn't go right. Her curiosity was killing her, but she respected his request for privacy. On the fourth day, Annie Walsh and three other young women rode out to the ranch. Naomi was startled but pleased by the visit. They brought fabric, thread, even some dried flowers as gifts. We wanted to thank you, Annie explained as they sat on the porch drinking lemonade Naomi had made from their supplies. For what you said at that meeting, for being brave enough to tell the truth. I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just tired of lying. That's exactly what made it brave, said Rachel, one of the other women. Most of us spend our whole lives lying about what we really want, what we really think. You showed us we don't have to. They spent the afternoon sewing curtains together, talking and laughing and sharing stories. For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Naomi felt like she had friends, real friends, not just people tolerating her presence. When they left, Annie pulled Naomi aside. Half the town thinks you're scandalous. The other half thinks you're inspiring. I'm in the second half. Don't let the first half make you doubt yourself. I'm trying not to. Good. Because watching you fight for what you want made some of us realize we should fight for what we want too. You started something bigger than you know. After they left, Naomi hung the new curtains in the windows. The house transformed instantly, looking less like a bachelor's cabin and more like an actual home. She stood back, admiring the effect, and felt a fierce sense of ownership. This was hers. She'd claimed it, built it, made it matter. That evening, Elias finally emerged from the barn carrying something large wrapped in canvas. He had sawdust in his hair and a satisfied expression on his face. Close your eyes, he instructed. Elias, close them. Trust me. She closed her eyes and heard him set something down on the porch. Wood scraped against wood, then silence. Okay, open. Naomi opened her eyes and gasped. Sitting on the porch was a rocking chair, beautifully crafted from smooth wood with curved arms and a high back. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with obvious care. Every joint fitted perfectly, the wood sanded until it gleamed. You made this? Spent the last week on it. Figured you needed somewhere comfortable to sit while you're doing all that planning for the future. Naomi ran her hands over the wood, feeling the smoothness, the care in every detail. It's beautiful. It's practical, but also a promise. He looked nervous suddenly, uncertain. A promise that you'll be here to use it, that we're building something lasting. She sat down in the chair and rocked gently. It moved perfectly. No squeaks, no wobbles, just smooth comfort. I love it, but Elias, you know what this means, don't you? A rocking chair? People put these on porches when they're settling down for life, when they're planning for children and grandchildren and growing old together. I know what it means. And you built it anyway. I built it anyway. Naomi felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were good tears, happy tears, the kind that came from realizing you'd been given something precious you'd stopped believing you could have. Ask me, she said quietly. Ask you what? You know what. Ask me properly. Elias's heart started hammering. Naomi, I'm not good with words. I don't care. Ask me. He knelt down beside the rocking chair, taking her hands in his. They were shaking slightly, both of them nervous and terrified and completely sure all at once. Naomi Hale, I've known you for less than 2 weeks, which is probably the stupidest timeline for this kind of decision. But you've changed everything. You've made this house feel like a home. You've reminded me that I'm more than the worst things I've done. You've shown me that starting over is possible. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. So I'm asking, will you marry me? For real this time, not because the town demands it, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Naomi was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Elias stood and pulled her up from the chair, and this time when they kissed, it wasn't tentative or uncertain. It was sure and solid and full of promise. They stood there on the porch, holding each other as the sun set over the prairie, and for the first time in years, both of them felt like they might actually deserve happiness. We should probably tell people, Naomi said eventually, pulling back just enough to see his face, before rumors start about what we're doing out here. Let them rumor? But yes, we should make it official. Would you want to get married in town? Actual ceremony? I want to get married wherever you're comfortable, but Elias, I think it would mean something to have it in town. To show them we're not hiding or ashamed, that we chose this, chose each other, and we're not apologizing for it. Then we'll do it in town. Give them something to really talk about. They spent that evening planning, making lists, discussing details. It was strange and wonderful and slightly terrifying, this shift from surviving to actually planning for a future. Naomi kept touching the rocking chair like she needed to confirm it was real. The next morning, they rode into Red Hollow together to speak with the preacher. The ride felt different this time, less like heading into battle and more like claiming their place in the world. People stared, of course, but Naomi had stopped caring about the stares. Let them look. She had nothing to hide. Reverend Thomas agreed to perform the ceremony with minimal fuss. He was a practical man who'd seen enough frontier life to understand that love came in unexpected packages. When were you thinking? He asked. Soon, Elias said. We've waited long enough. This Sunday, then. That gives people time to hear about it, but not enough time to work themselves into opposition. Thomas smiled slightly. I'm happy for you both. It's not often we see people fight as hard as you two have for each other. Word spread through town faster than wildfire. By the time Elias and Naomi left the church, it seemed like everyone knew. The reactions were mixed. Some people looked scandalized, others pleased, most just curious. Martha Chen actually stopped them on the street. Miss Hale, or I suppose it'll be Mrs. Mercer soon, I want to apologize. For the council meeting, for how I treated you. I let my own discomfort with irregular situations cloud my judgment about your character. Naomi was so surprised she almost didn't know what to say. Thank you. That means something. You showed courage standing up to all of us. That kind of courage is rare. I hope you'll accept my best wishes for your marriage. After Martha walked away, Naomi turned to Elias with wide eyes. Did that just happen? Apparently winning changes how people treat you. Who knew? They stopped at Morrison's office to share the news personally. The doctor grinned when they told him. About damn time. I was starting to think you two would dance around this forever. We needed to be sure, Naomi said. And now you are. Now we are. Good. Because I can tell you from medical experience that being sure beats being careful every single time. Careful keeps you safe. Sure keeps you alive. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Naomi altered her best dress to make it wedding appropriate. Elias cleaned up the ranch house until it gleamed. Annie and the other women helped with flowers and decorations, treating the whole thing like a community project. On Sunday morning, Naomi woke before dawn, too nervous and excited to sleep. She lay in bed listening to Elias move around in the main room and thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The train platform, the humiliation, the desperate choice to trust a stranger. All of it had led here, to a tiny church in a harsh frontier town where she was about to marry a man she'd known for 2 weeks and loved completely. It didn't make sense by any conventional measure. But then, love rarely did. The ceremony was set for late morning. Naomi dressed carefully, her hands shaking slightly as she pinned up her hair. When she emerged from the bedroom, Elias was waiting, wearing his best shirt and looking terrified. You look beautiful, he said. You look scared. I am scared, but the good kind of scared, the kind that means something matters. They rode to town together one last time as unmarried people. The church was more crowded than Naomi had expected, not just curious onlookers, but people who genuinely wanted to celebrate with them. Doc Morrison stood near the front with Annie and her friends. Even some of the council members had shown up, including Frank Sullivan, who gave them a respectful nod. The ceremony itself was simple and quick. Reverend Thomas spoke about commitment and courage, about choosing love in harsh circumstances. Elias's voice shook slightly when he said his vows, but he didn't look away from Naomi's eyes. Her voice was stronger than she'd expected, clear and certain. When Thomas pronounced them married, the church erupted in applause. It wasn't universal approval. Naomi could see a few disapproving faces in the back rows, but it was genuine celebration from enough people to matter. They walked out of this church as husband and wife into bright sunlight and cheering. Someone had organized a small reception at the schoolhouse, nothing fancy but heartfelt. People brought food and well wishes. Annie presented them with a quilt she and the other women had made, each square representing a different hope for their future. "For your new home," Annie said. "May it always be filled with warmth." Thomas Garrett's name wasn't mentioned once. It was like the town had collectively decided to pretend that whole ugly episode had never happened. Naomi knew that was how frontier towns worked. What was inconvenient got forgotten, and what was useful got celebrated. Today, her marriage to Elias was useful. It made their living situation proper. It resolved the scandal. It gave everyone a happy ending to focus on instead of the uncomfortable questions about judgment and cruelty. She should probably have been bothered by that. But standing beside her new husband, watching him awkwardly accept congratulations from people who'd feared him just weeks before, she found she didn't care. Let them rewrite the story however they needed to. She knew the truth. That real courage looked like standing on a platform surrounded by your scattered belongings and having a stranger step forward anyway. That real love looked like a rocking chair built in secret and given without expectation. That real redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something better in spite of it. By afternoon, Elias and Naomi escaped back to the ranch, exhausted but happy. The wagon bed was full of gifts, food, household items, even a bottle of whiskey from Doc Morrison with a note that said, "For medicinal purposes only." When they pulled up to the house, Naomi noticed something different. The garden she'd worked so hard on was blooming, the first shoots of new growth pushing through the soil. The house with its new curtains looked settled and permanent. The rocking chair sat on the porch, waiting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer," Elias said, helping her down from the wagon. "Mrs. Mercer." She tried the name out, tasting it. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We have time, all the time in the world." They carried their gifts inside, and Naomi looked around the small house with new eyes. This was hers now. Legally, officially, completely hers. She'd come west looking for safety, and had found something far more valuable: belonging. That evening, they sat together in the rocking chair on the porch, Naomi leaning against Elias's chest, watching the sun paint the sky in impossible colors. The prairie stretched out before them, harsh and beautiful, and full of possibility. "Do you think we'll be happy?" Naomi asked quietly. "I think we'll try to be happy. That's probably the best anyone can do." "That's very practical of you. I learned from the best." She laughed and tilted her head back to look at him. "We're really doing this, building a life together." "We really are. Terrifying, isn't it?" "Completely terrifying, also completely right." They sat there as darkness fell, wrapped in each other and in the quiet certainty that they'd made the right choice. It wouldn't always be easy. Frontier life never was. There would be hard winters and failed crops and probably more judgment from people who didn't understand. But they'd face it together, two people who'd been discarded by the world and had found each other anyway. In the months that followed, the garden flourished under Naomi's care. She taught herself to preserve vegetables and make preserves from wild berries. The house slowly filled with small improvements: curtains, rugs, little touches that made it feel lived in and loved. Elias's ranch started producing better yields as Naomi's practical mind applied itself to managing the property alongside his labor. Word got around that Naomi was an excellent seamstress, and people started bringing her work: mending, alterations, even a few dresses for special occasions. She built a small business from the ranch, earning her own money and her own reputation separate from being Elias Mercer's wife. Annie and the other young women became regular visitors. What had started as support for Naomi's courage evolved into a genuine friendship circle, women who were tired of being told what they could and couldn't do with their lives. They met at the ranch every few weeks, sewing and talking and encouraging each other to want more than what they'd been told to settle for. The town never fully forgot the scandal of how Elias and Naomi had gotten together, but it faded into background noise. New scandals emerged, new dramas took center stage. Elias was still regarded with some wariness, but increasing respect as people saw how hard he worked, how devoted he was to his wife, how he genuinely changed from whatever he'd been before. One evening, about 6 months after their wedding, Naomi found Elias standing by the garden, staring at something. When she joined him, she saw he was looking at a rose cutting she'd planted, the one she'd mentioned wanting to try from the very first week. It had taken root and was producing its first bloom, a small red flower that seemed impossible in the harsh prairie soil. "You did it," Elias said. "Made something beautiful grow where nothing should grow." "We did it," Naomi corrected. "This whole place, the garden, the house, our life together, we built it together. I never thought I'd have this. A home, a wife, a future that didn't involve running from my past. And I never thought I'd find a place where I was valued for who I actually am, instead of who people wanted me to be." She slipped her hand into his. "We're lucky, you know. Not because things worked out easily, but because we found each other when we both needed finding. That's not luck. That's you being stubborn enough to stay and me being desperate enough to help." Then I guess stubbornness and desperation are underrated virtues. They stood there as the sun set, watching that impossible rose bloom in impossible soil. It wasn't a metaphor for their relationship so much as proof that hard ground could grow beautiful things if you were patient enough and stubborn enough and willing to do the work. The truth neither of them said out loud, but both understood was that happiness wasn't something you earned through suffering. It wasn't a reward for good behavior or a prize for surviving. It was something you built, deliberately and carefully, one choice at a time. The choice to step forward when everyone else stepped back. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier. The choice to believe that broken people could build unbroken lives together. Years later, when people asked how they'd met, Naomi always told the truth, that she'd arrived in Red Hollow with nothing and been rejected by everyone except a man the town feared. That they'd fought for the right to be together against people who thought they knew better. That their love had been forged in conflict and desperation and had somehow emerged stronger for it. And every time she told the story, sitting in that rocking chair on the porch, with Elias beside her, she ended it the same way. "We were two people nobody wanted, and that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to either of us, because we found each other when we stopped looking for anyone's approval except our own." The harsh frontier town of Red Hollow never did become particularly gentle or forgiving. But within its boundaries, on a small ranch 15 miles from anywhere, two outcasts built something that mattered. They proved that dignity wasn't granted by others, but claimed for yourself. That respect had to be demanded, not waited for. That love didn't require perfect circumstances, just two people stubborn enough to keep choosing each other. The rose kept blooming year after year, impossible and beautiful. And so did they.